Hey folks, welcome back to another Western Rookie podcast brought to you by GOHUNT. We've got an exciting episode coming up for you, but before we do, we have gotten a lot of good feedback from our last couple of podcasts about planning, e-scouting, and gear. And I'm going to read some of the questions that you guys have been sending in because I think they're all really good questions that we can cover here in the podcast. So let's dive into a couple of these in case other people are also having these similar questions. I want to help every one of you guys out. So first up, we got Brett from North Dakota writes in, I drew a North Dakota mule deer rifle tag for a special unit. I'm not going to blast it on the air. Never hunted out there, so I'd appreciate any tips you have. I live in Horace, so I will make it out there at least a few times prior to season to scout. Thanks. Enjoy the podcast. Hey, Brett, thanks for reaching out. First off, the unit you drew is a phenomenal unit. I've been in that unit many times. It's the same unit that I've hunted and scouted for years while I lived in North Dakota. And the tag you have is a really special tag. It does take, a few years for residents to draw, and it seems like it takes a lifetime for non-residents to draw. And so my best advice is get out there as early and often as you can, just learning the roads in that unit and how to navigate the unit. And when it comes to finding big deer, you're going to see a lot less road pressure and hunting pressure the farther away you get from the interstates and the major road system. So try to get back in there a little bit farther and look for, specifically in your area, look for areas that have not been summer grazed. There's summer pastures and there's winter pastures in your unit, and the ranchers will leave some pastures ungrazed so they have winter feed, which means that they've usually got great grass, a lot of feed, no cattle pressure pushing the deer out. And so if you can find a couple of those places, I think you're going to see a lot more deer on average in those areas that haven't been grazed and pastured all summer long. That's the best advice I can give you, other than just spending lots of time out there and getting some miles in on the boots. That's an awesome tag. I'm really excited for you, and make sure you send in a picture when you wrap that hunt up later this fall, because that's going to be a sweet experience. I did not draw. I applied for some of the same units you did. I didn't draw this year as a non-resident, no shocker, but I'm living through you vicariously. So next up, we got Drew. Drew writes in, thanks for putting out a great podcast. Latest gear episode was very eye-opening and informative. I was just wondering, what binoculars are you using and what power? Thank you. I typically hunt farm country for whitetail, but headed to eastern Wyoming for a couple weeks this fall. I think this is a great question because I think this really represents the average Western Rookie listener and myself. So I grew up in Minnesota. My main hunt is whitetail country, like farm country, whitetail farms. That's where I spend 95% of my hunting time. But I travel out west every year. And what's the best fit for both? So I've been using 1042s, either Leopold or Vortex. I'm leaning more towards Vortex lately. But they're pretty much the same. They both have great quality, a great warranty, and it's a nice compact size for farm country whitetails. I've been using these binos for everything I do for the last 8-9 years. The 1042s, shed hunting, western hunting, archery, rifle, whitetails, elk, mule deer, antelope, everything. What I will say is there's a lot of good technology coming out that's making the 1250s and even the 1556s a lot more compact and lighter. And the next pair I buy will either be 1250s or 1556s, just to get a little bit more magnification. Probably 1250s is where I'm going to go next. And I'm going to be using those for everything to replace my 1042s. My 1042s will probably either turn into house binoculars or truck binoculars, but that's where I'm at with binos. I don't think you can really go wrong, either the 1042s or the 1250s, and I think that'll be a good fit for everyone. If you got a bigger bino harness or you want to carry a little bit more weight, the 1556s definitely could replace a spotter in certain situations too. So thanks for writing in, Drew. I really appreciate it. Next week, coming over to Jim. Hey, I just found your podcast, The Western Rookie. Great stuff. Trying to catch up as much as possible. One question I had about Montana: is there a way to just buy a straight up point? I would have had to apply before April, or would I have had to apply before April 1st in the application and get the point then? Thank you so much. So another great question. In Montana, they have a point only period. I believe it ends September 30th. I always confuse Wyoming and Montana's, but we will be doing a bonus episode later to make sure to remind everybody when these fall point deadlines are. But you can buy a point only option in Montana. Now, one of the interesting things about Montana is that they're changing legislation, and now you can only buy a point for 1 year without applying. So you can buy a point the first year, but then the next year you have to apply for your preference points or you will lose them. Remind everybody the maximum number of preference points currently in Montana is 2. That's to draw your big game combo licenses, either the elk combo, the deer combo, or the big game combo. That's your general take. You also buy a bonus point in the fall. That's to apply for a limited entry unit that you can also hunt in addition to your general tag. So yes, you can buy those later this fall. Great question. Thanks for writing in, Jim. And then lastly, we got Silas. Silas is writing in from the farm country as well. Hey man, I'm an avid Western hunter, but I still get so much info and tips from the Western Rookie podcast. I appreciate that. The latest gear prep, archery, and rifle hunt podcasts you have done are great. I like the detail with the calibers for the Western rifle hunts. And I was looking to flip that question over for hunting whitetails in Wisconsin, really anywhere. My first buck I shot was in Wisconsin with an old Remington core lock, dumped him, but I found lead in his rear quarter and vowed to never do that again. Last year I used my elk round, the Hornady Precision Hunter ELDX, and that did great, but it seemed to be overkill for whitetails. I shoot a 30-06 and love it. I've never shot anything below 165 out west, so I'm wondering if you recommend a different caliber altogether. I do have access to a 270 or bump down to 150 grain or lesser bullet for whitetails. People have told me a heavier bullet will do good for brush penetration. We hunt both in stands and deer drives. So I'm also thinking about scopes or no scopes. Great question. Lots to dive into here, Silas. Thank you for reaching out. So, first of all, I'm going to take a topic by topic. So, the first thing I see in your message is the concerns with the lead fragments, and that is a very big topic. It's something that I've actually been starting to change the bullets I pick because of. So, we talked about this in the rifle episode. You have 3 bullet options, basically. You have lead core bullets. You have partition bullets, and you have solid copper or monolithic bullets. So a traditional lead core bullet is very infamous for fragmentation. When the bullet hits the animal, it mushrooms out, and the lead is such a soft metal and easily fragments, and you find little pieces that can get dispersed up to and sometimes including all the way to like the rear quarters on a good heart or lung shot. Those fragments can really expand, and so you might be finding little bits of lead. And what I worry about is the ones you don't find, right? The really small ones that you accidentally ingest. Now, there's a partition bullet. So this bullet still has the hollow point or the polymer tip for the expansion, but after the tip, there's a little internal wall of copper, typically copper, that separates the tip from the rear of the bullet, and that really controls how much fragmentation you get and keeps that bullet together a lot better and can have a lot more penetration. Nosler is famous for inventing the partition bullet for moose hunting. There's some really good podcasts if you listen back to on the Randy Newberg podcast. We also had Maddie Woodward on the Western Rookie podcast talking about this topic as well. You're still going to get a little bit of fragmentation from that tip, but it's a lot better than a true lead core. And then finally, you have monolithic bullets. Now I'm moving everything over to monolithic. Monolithics have far less fragmentation and they don't have any lead. And so I'm going that direction for all rifle hunting bullets. Personally, I really like those. So that's what I have to say about the leg fragmentations. I think you're right on the money with being concerned about that. So the next up, what weight to pick for, weights and calibers. So a 30-06, great rifle. There's nothing wrong with a 30-06. I think one of the, I would say like an oligarchy caliber, right? It's not going anywhere. It's been around since the beginning of time. So many animals have been successfully harvested with a 30-06. I would not be afraid to stick with your 30-06 if you've already got it. It's a wonderful round. Now, what I will say is overkill there is such a thing as overkill, but as long as you're not losing meat from it, I don't personally get too worried about it. I shot a doe antelope with my 300 Win Mag and a 180 grain monolithic bullet, and I had very little damage because I didn't put that bullet up forward in the shoulders. I moved it back to a lung shot, and I had very little waste. So I wouldn't be too concerned about overkill. But at the same side, I am actually looking for lighter bullets, especially for deer, both whitetails and mule deer and antelope. All the research that I've been doing, even as back to like memoirs of Teddy Roosevelt, all indicate that a lighter, faster bullet has a lot more ability and maybe just a higher tendency of dropping animals in their tracks versus a slower, heavier bullet. And with a deer-sized target, in some of these 30 caliber rounds, I'm not worried about penetration. I'm going to get that pass through either way. And if I can get a little bit more speed to have a higher tendency of dropping the animal in its tracks and a faster, more ethical harvest, I'm going to do that. So I'm not afraid at all going to a 150 grain bullet for deer and antelope. I would even say my, niece shot her elk with a 7mm 08, and I believe she was shooting 140 or 143 grain bullet out of that. Don't quote me. I'm not an expert on the 7mm 08. But I don't think lighter bullets are a problem at all until you start getting down to maybe a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 243. Then I wouldn't necessarily go to the lightest end of the spectrum, because then you can get into, like, I believe 90 and 100 grain bullets, and that to me seems a little too light. But I wouldn't be opposed at all to doing 150 grain out of your 30-06 for deer hunting. Or your 270, if you've got access to it and you want to switch up, nothing wrong with a 270. I think a 270 is one of the best all-around rifles for North American big game, other than, grizzly bears, brown bears, and moose. I think the 270 is a jack of all trades. Really, it is. Now, the second part of this question, people talking about brush, heavier bullets will do better for brush penetration and doing deer drives versus stand hunting. I don't do a lot of deer drives, but I am a pretty analytical person. And so I think the math would indicate that, yes, a heavier bullet is harder to deflect. Now, here's where I wouldn't get too into the weeds here. So in order to actually, determine the differences, we're talking about, in the case of a 150 to a 165, we're talking about, what is that, 20% difference? No, 10% difference of weight. So it's a very small difference in weight. Velocity's higher. And so now we're starting to get into some really difficult calculations. How hard did you hit the brush? Is it a twig? Is it a sapling? How far in front of the target is it? I think, either bullet, a 155 or a 165 or a 178 like your ELDX, you hit a light twig 3 feet in front of the deer, I don't think that's going to make a difference. You hit a 2-inch sapling 10 feet in front of the deer, I think all bullets are going to get affected. So it's a really tight corner condition that I don't think anyone's capable of making these true calculations. So I wouldn't personally pick a bullet based on how it's going to perform in the brush. I'm just going to tackle those in the moment and try to find and take shots that don't have any brush at all. So that's my stance on that. And then there is a concern about scopes and optics. So with short range, fast moving things, deer drives, walking to your stand, it can be really hard to pick up and acquire your target with a 5 to 25 power scope. My shotgun that I use in our shotgun zones is a 1.5 to 4.5 power scope. So I think there's a lot of options out there, maybe like a 2 to 10 tactical style scope that has a wider field of view at the low power, and that can be a nice way to do your deer drives. But then when you're on stand, you can dial that up to 10 and get the good, precision you're hoping for with a typical shot you would take from the stand. I don't know what the overlap's going to be between like a scope that's well suited for Wisconsin whitetail and hunting out west. That might be something where you're swapping out your 2x10 for like a 4x16 when you go out west. But that's kind of where I would take it. Otherwise, there are some scope rings that are made for iron sight rifles. So they're like a medium or a high scope ring with a channel in the middle. So you can either look through the scope or you can look under the scope and still use your iron sights. That might also be a good option for those faster deer drive style shots. So those are my comments there. Thank you, Silas. I'm actually really excited. We've got Silas coming up on a future episode of the Western Rookie. So be on the lookout for that. Those are the questions and the news from the listeners. I appreciate everyone reaching out. If you listen to this and you have a question that you thought about asking, shoot me a message. Shoot me a message on any platform or an email. We field questions all the time, and I want to do more of this, answering them live on the podcast as I'm able to, because I think it's really fun. So thank you all for listening. And I want to say, just take a moment and thank you all for being podcast listeners for the Western Rookie. I really appreciate it. And if you wouldn't mind taking a quick moment to like or subscribe on whatever platform you're currently listening to this podcast on, it really helps. And if you really want to help the Western Rookie podcast and help some of your friends and family members, feel free to share this to someone that you know that has always talked about Western hunting, or maybe is new to Western hunting, or that you think might enjoy Western hunting someday. Send a link to this podcast over to them and say, hey, you should check this out. I would love to help as many people as possible feel that joy and happiness and those feelings of success when you go out west and you do something that's hard and challenging and you come out the other side, victorious and successful. I want to help other people feel that. We've all felt that. And if you think there's someone in your life that would enjoy that, the Western hunting environment, the Western hunting experience, please share this with them. Let's help more people find and learn how to hunt the West. With that, let's kick this episode off. We've got a great guest with you today, and right in. Thanks for being here, folks.
You're listening to The Western Rookie, a hunting podcast full of tips, tricks, and strategies from seasoned Western hunters. There are plenty of opportunities out there. We just need to learn how to take on the challenges.
Hunting is completely different up there.
I've harvested 26 big game animals.
You can fool their eyes, but you can't fool their nose.
300 yards back to the road turned into 3 miles back the other way.
It's always cool seeing new hunters go and harvest an animal.
I don't know what to expect.
If there's anybody I want in the woods with me, it'll be you.
Welcome back to another Western Rookie podcast episode brought to you by GOHUNT. Today, I'm excited to have a really cool conversation with Cody Rich from the Rich Outdoors. I don't know if you know this, Cody, but you've been nominated multiple times by previous guests to be on the podcast. I think the latest was Jaden Bales. If you had a chance to listen to that episode. But yeah, he's like, you got to get Cody on. He's like, he's the Western version of you, because we also have an entrepreneurship podcast, an outdoors entrepreneurship podcast, and like dedicated Western hunting podcast. And he's like, you're going to love it. And so I was like, really busy, summer's kind of busy with fishing trips and family vacations for me. And so I finally got around to reaching out to you, and we're here today, but very excited for the conversation. And we're talking a little bit in the green room about like what's on my mind, what kind of conversations would be really valuable to me, like me personally, which I hope I embody the average Western Rookie listener, that Midwest, maybe a whitetail bow hunter, waterfall, upland that likes to get out west as much as possible. And there's just a huge gap, I think, when you're getting into that of where to go, what to do, how to plan a hunt, all the things. And that's what I hope to help folks with this podcast. And the topic came up in the green room of like, there's so many things to do in the West. There's archery elk, and there's antelope and mule deer. And then if you really get into like the different landscapes, you can do all those things. And I mean, it's a very long list, and I'm a person that really likes to try everything. And so how to balance that between doing like the old favorites, right? Like the traditional, the September elk hunt with the core group that we do every year, but then you want to branch out and try something else. You wanted to get a mule deer hunt in, want to, you know, like this year we're going on an elk hunt with my wife instead. And it's like, how to balance all those different things? Well, being a husband, not yet for me, but a lot of people, yourself, father, have a family. Most people have day jobs. Most people don't hunt for a living, as much as we all dream to do that. And so, like, I think that'd be a really interesting conversation to hear your thoughts, and maybe just talking through that together helps some of the listeners kind of think through their own situation, and I don't know, maybe for lack of anything else, just realize they're not the only ones talking or thinking about these types of questions.
Yeah, and it's well, thanks for having me. And it's funny because you know, I got into, so I guess for context, like I grew up on a farm, grass seed farm, was definitely supposed to take over the farm, you know, all these things. And quickly I was super into bow hunting. My cousins run bow hunting, and it was like, we nerded out, and it was kind of, I remember getting this conversation with the family of like, you know, if you're going to be a farmer, you know, maybe pick up rifle hunting or maybe not bow hunting. And it was like, oh, new career path, check, got that. And it was like instantly I did, you know, it was like, how do I do this? And so it's kind of been, I want to say, top of mind for me since a very, very early age. It's always been like, how do I build my life to be able to do the things I want to do? Even before it was cool, before like internet entrepreneurship was cool, before all of those things, I was kind of the guy that was like, man, I just want to go hunting more. Like, you know, what does success in that avenue look like? And so for me, it's kind of, I've just built my life around that. And I think we're at this, you know, to your point of, man, you want to do all these cool things. And I think there's a ton of people who are realizing, man, I want to go do cool trips every year. And then like they do that and they're like, I want to kind of do more cool trips every year. Yeah. And, you know, we're getting into this phase where you want to build that lifestyle. And, you know, hunting is very much a lifestyle. Adventure hunting specifically is very much a lifestyle. Like it takes a lot, right? It's not cheap. It's not like, you know, growing up going whitetail hunting in your backyard. Like it's just at a new level. And so you kind of got to build your life around it. And that's something I've done from the very get-go. It's something I've tried to do. You know, I've been very intentional about it. You know, I'm a total book nerd. I've studied every entrepreneur, like everything I've ever done in my life up till now, which I'm, you know, for anybody listening, I'm 30, just turned 38. So 38, I have 2 kids. I get to go hunting a lot. And I've built my life to do so. And I think it's one of those things that I get a lot of feedback. You know, I started a hunting podcast years ago and, you know, kind of got burnt out on just talking about hunting. And I didn't know if my audience would like me talking about entrepreneurship, but I started doing it, started just interviewing people who I was interested in talking to, people who were hunting all the time. And I was like, man, how do you get to do that? Right. And it turns out there's a lot of people that want to listen to that. They want to know how to do that. Right. They want to build their life around that. Like, we're just at we're a cool point in the world, making money on the internet, whatever you call it. It's like you can kind of be able to make your money doing a lot of cool stuff or doing very interesting things, and be able to go do hunts, go on adventures, do whatever. And, you know, I did that for a lot of years. I'm actually at the point where it's like, I want to just have the freedom, right? The freedom to go, whether it's go hunting or hang out with my kids or whatever, you know, whenever I want. And so, you know, there's a lot of benefits to spending 20 years trying to figure out how to make money that allowed me to go hunting all the time. Cause now when I have kids, like now I have the ability to like go do whatever they want, you know, go like fishing or, you know, whatever, go to the lake whenever they want. And I think it's a good skill set to me. I mean, we could deep dive into this. Like there's just certain skills you want to acquire over, you know, like if you look at the long game. And I think this is pretty applicable to hunting because, you know, you get into hunting, whether you're a whitetail hunter, whether, you know, whatever, like you think about it in a career perspective of like over my life, here's the skills I want to acquire. Here's the adventures I want to acquire. And there's a famous saying of like, you can have everything you want, just not all at the same time. And I think that's, you know, it's really good advice, but it's hard to hear. And I think if you take that and break it down and be like, you know, to your point, like, how do I do all these hunts? Like you can do them all. You just have to look at it from a 30-year perspective and not a 2-year or a 1 year.
Yeah. And I think it's easy. And I've actually had people say this to me. And that really was like, wow, that's the power of social media today, where I've done a lot of cool things. And I mean, you can really paint any picture you want to paint with the frequency that you post on social media. It's like, you know, one of my old football coaches, I went back, I was in my hometown on a Friday night. So I went and watched, my old team, and I had a couple coaches I really liked. And so I was out on the field afterwards talking to them and just catching up. And they're like, man, what are you doing for work these days? It seems like you're like on every hunt all fall long. Like, do you even like have a job? Are you hunting for a living now? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, no, I just posted pictures from 5 different experiences over the last year in the same week.
Yeah.
So it looked like I was in Oklahoma and North Dakota and Canada and all these different things, but it really wasn't. And I think a lot of people can be seeing that as well and being like, oh man, everyone's hunting for the entire fall. And it's like, well, maybe not. A lot of people probably aren't. And so I think people are starting to kind of think through, like what you said, is how do I do more of what I love? And maybe
Yeah.
it's just our generation is more restless and more unwilling to just do the 40 years at the desk job and get the gold watch and then, plan the golden years, right? We're like, nah, that doesn't
Yeah.
sound like a great proposition for me. I want to do all of that, during those 40 years. And so that's a big thing that I've been trying to think about. And I like the way you said, like, you can have everything you want, you just can't have it all at once. And I think that really applies to Western hunting in a lot of ways. Like it is expensive for most people unless you live in Montana and you only hunt in Montana, which Montana offers a lot. But it also applies when you're just getting tags. Like you can't get every tag in the same year, with point
Yeah.
systems and draw odds. Like you have to kind of plan out a long-term strategy if you want to get all those experiences. Like you can't, it takes time to draw some of these tags and hunt some of these places.
I
There's
think
no way,
first
or
and
a lot of
foremost,
money.
yeah, no, I think I 100% agree. Like, there's a reason I moved to Montana. But I think first and foremost, I think people put these type of things on a pedestal, and I think first and foremost, you just book the hunt, right? Like I saw a meme. It was like redneck math: buy the boat, buy the expensive boats, and you'll figure out how to make the money. And like I laugh, but I think that's kind of also true for like hunts, right? Like book the trip that's gonna change your life, and you'll figure out how to make it happen. And some of these hunts, like even I know so many people are like, man, I dream of a DIY elk hunt someday. You're like someday, it's not that
Yeah, I
expensive.
said the
Like if you
same
can't
thing.
figure out
Like,
how to like $5,000,
Yeah.
and that's like probably on the expensive end. You can't figure out how to
Oh my
bring
gosh.
$5,000 in 3 years. Like, are you really trying? Like any self-respecting Facebook marketplace troller can make a couple grand in 2 years, right? And so I think it's like, book the trip and figure out how to pay for it, how to work it. And I say this about Alaska. I in 2021 went on a caribou hunt up there, and it was kind of like, yep, just book it and you'll figure out how to make it work, right? And I think that's the start. And once you start doing that, it's once a year, and then it's like a couple times a
Right.
year. It's like 2 trips a year, and then this is kind of the best way to start. But I think if you put it on a pedestal, it can be one of those things that you never do. B, if you don't start, you'll never like incrementally change your lifestyle and figure out how to do that. So I think, people are like, man, I can't do that, my job or this or whatever. And like slowly you figure it out. Like if it's 1 trip a
Yeah.
year, it's very manageable. And then how do you turn that into 2? How do you turn that into 3 trips a year? And, man, 2 or 3 trips a year, like I'm at the point where, I get to hunt a lot in Montana, but 1 or 2 out-of-state hunts is really all I want. Like, that's kind of enough for me to get the full experience out of everything and not feel like I'm bouncing from hunt to hunt. So, I don't think it takes a ton, but you kind of have to A, start, and B, just start migrating your lifestyle, change a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and especially for someone that like yourself that has a, maybe not a growing family, but a young family, like young kids, like you want to be with your kids. And most good parents do, right? Like most people want to spend time with their little children, especially when they start growing into like themselves and starting to have personalities, and you get to bring them along on adventures. Like you don't want to be, getting updates for an entire month through FaceTime because you're, states away, right? Like you want to be home, you want to come back. And so I kind of in that same, I did it a little differently. I kind of determined like one thing a month in the fall is really as much as I can really sustain and keep all the other boats afloat, right? You know, if I'm doing two, like imagine I've done it before, like back to back elk hunt, mule deer hunt, home for 3 days, back on the road. Like it's just not sustainable. You can do it every now and then, like you randomly draw two amazing tags. You can make it work, but like to do that consistently plus a day job, it just seems a little unsustainable to manage like you can pick 2 out of 3, right? Hunt all the time,
Yeah.
a day job, and a family. Like if you don't have a family, if you're a single dude or a single woman, sure, you can hunt as much as you want, and then if the money's there, you have no responsibilities. Or if you're stay at home spouse, and you can hunt all you want, and all you do when you're home, all you have to do is focus on your family. But if you got to do all three, it just becomes unsustainable really fast. So that's kind of where I drew the line, is no more than one a month. And there's a lot of months where it is just out the back door at home. We don't travel anywhere to do any of the big things a lot of the months. So it basically ends up being like 1 or 2 big fall events a year. So
Yeah,
that's where we're at with it. Yeah, that's where we're at with it. And there's so many, man, there's like you said, there's a lot of skills that it takes to build and to kind of build into the experiences you want. I think a lot of people maybe see the YouTube or the Instagram or the airwaves media of the experience, and that's what they want. And it's like a lot of times that's not going to be the first experience, right? Like the first time you go elk hunting likely isn't going to be the 350-inch bull bugling in your face at 10 yards. A lot of people get lucky. It happens, but it's, there's skills along the way. There's not a lot of transferable skills other than like accurately shooting a bow that correlate from tree stand whitetails in a food plot to chasing bugling elk. Like
I think one of the best skills you can have as a Western hunter is logistics. Once you get good at logistics, planning, being able to go with the flow, because I think if I had a super set of skills, it's very much like I can show up to any unit and figure it out and kind of have a pretty good idea of what's going to go wrong, what I need equipment wise, not be over, stacked. We kind of going back to that. I could use 2 examples, but going back to the caribou hunt, one of my hunting partners and I did, it's kind of a last minute thing. We threw it together and we show up and it was like, okay, we just got to figure it out. And, him and I we've done Colorado together. We've done Montana together. We've done Alaska together. And so it's kind of like just getting this okay, let's just figure the unit out. And this is a really, really big unit, but we'll just figure it out. It's the haul road hunt, which I highly recommend for anyone. And then, the same, as you grow, this year I'm headed up to Alaska to do a moose hunt. And again, it's like me just trying to think through all of the logistics, all of the things that are going to go wrong, how to have plan Bs, and work through all of those kinks before I show up. Because, sometimes this is like, getting dropped off. So once you get dropped off, you really limits your plan Bs, so to speak. So making sure you work through those, and that's the skill that just going on these hunts creates. And that's, dude, for me, driving from early age, I remember hearing that somebody else, this guy I know, went to Idaho and killed a second elk. And I was like, what? You can just go to other states and kill another elk? I'm in, and that was that was hardcore back then. I think I was 16. And I was just hunting Oregon, and I heard about this guy that went to Idaho and killed an elk. I'm like, I'm in. So I think 2 years later, I went to Idaho on my first out of state hunt, killed a stomper, herd bull, and was hooked. It was like, okay, what other states can I go to? And that's really the skill. I had a lot of failures over the years of going to a new state, going to a new area. And I think even whitetail guys, this happens to, right? You're oh, I'm going to go to another state. So then they get in tags somewhere, they get a lease somewhere, and they kind of get good at those logistics. And it's the same thing as if you're going to go to a mule deer hunt somewhere, or you're going to do an elk hunt somewhere. Sometimes the logistics just get a little bit heavier because it's not like you're hunting one property, the same thing, but essentially it's the same skill set, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier where you hear it a lot, and I've heard it too. And that people will say, I dream about doing an elk hunt someday, but man, I don't know. And it almost borderline breaks my heart when someone will tell me that, because I know how easy it is. now that I've done 7, 8 archery elk hunts, right? It's almost the same as like the reason I started the business podcast, because I hear a lot of people like, I'd love to hunt and fish for a living, or I got this idea for a product, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do taxes, or if I need an LLC, or how to build a website. And then it like breaks my heart that that's the thing that's keeping you from chasing your dream. Because I know now that I've done it multiple times, just how easy it is to go set up a Shopify account, have your website live in like 24 hours, and have, they take care of it, so that's why I started that show. And when I hear that about elk hunting, I'm like, dude, it's like $1,500. Like, that's what I average to do an out of state elk hunt every year. Like, that's all in taxes, or not taxes, tags, gas, food, everything. I mean, it gets a little easier if you split gas 4 ways. Like, I think that's the ideal setup, is 4 dudes in a pickup and a trailer. Like, if you, maxing out 1 rig type of hunt. And it's like, yeah, if you go to Montana, it gets a little bit more expensive. Just the out-of-state Montana tag is like $1,100 now. So, that hunt might be like $1,600-$1,700. But yeah, Colorado, pretty darn cheap for overall elk hunting. You camp. I mean, you can go as expensive as you want. I mean, there's drop bidder services. You can be in a hotel every night. I mean, depends on what you guys want to do, but that's like $125 a month.
Yeah.
But most people probably have $125 of subscriptions they don't use anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's like one of those things where, if I was to flip the script and be like, man, someday I dream of killing a whitetail, you'd be like, well, that's silly. Like, you know how easy it is to kill a whitetail? Like, but I think the problem is people look at it as like, I don't want to spend the $1,500. What if I'm not successful? It's a way, and like that's
right.
Irrelevant. It's a sunk cost, and I think this is like really important lesson for everyone to kind of hear and think about in life. It's like you're not spending $1,500 to be successful or to not be successful. You're spending $1,500 on the adventure. So you're spending it on the experience, right? Like that's something you should always spend your money on, is doing new experiences. But think of it more as you're buying a skill set, right? Like you're buying an adventure skill set that's going to carry over in your life. The first one, maybe you're not successful, but eventually, you're building that skill set of like, man, I'm the kind of guy who does out of state hunts and I can go do these cool things, right? That is 100% a great ROI. And like no one in the world is going to be like, I really wish I wouldn't have traveled so much. Like that's not a thing, I wish I wouldn't have gone on so many hunts. Like I wish I would have saved my money for beer or whatever. Like that's not a thing. And so like,
I wish I would have had more money to go to the bar after work. Like, I'm like, that's the one that everyone's got their own thing, but I'm like, it's like, every night we meet up after work for happy hour. I'm like, it's like $100 a week you're wasting at a bar. That could have been your elk hunt, like there. I really get into that. I'm an engineer, and I had a great econ professor in high school at a college level class that got derailed every week talking about compound interest and the time value of money. And so I like to plan everything out. But when it comes to like experiences, I'm right there with you. Like the shiniest stuff in the world doesn't really matter at the end of your journey. Like you're not going to be like, man, look at how good my truck looks on your, on the final days. You're going to be like, man, remember that time in Colorado, or remember that time we did the Haul Road hunt in Alaska? That's what it's going to be. And I think I get into like I don't know if it's the proper term, but like skill stacking or skill building, right? Like Alaska is a beast in itself, right? The logistics of hunting Alaska from the lower 48 they're big, right? And so that's different skills that you've got now because you've gone to Alaska, you've figured it out. It's not necessarily difficult, just takes a lot of planning, and there's a lot of unknowns the first time. But then the Alaska terrain is big, right? The remoteness is big. Like you have to have a ton of skills to that hunt, where if you're coming from scratch, like you're that guy that's like, I've always dreamed of doing a moose hunt in Alaska, and you waited 40 years and you saved your pennies. Like you're just taking on, that's like drinking water from a fire hose, versus like, I'm kind of on the boat of like, well, if that's your goal, why don't you start with doing like a rifle antelope hunt in Wyoming, right? very low bar. You've probably already got a deer rifle, perfect for antelope. You've probably already got boots. You don't need anything crazy for an antelope hunt. Like it's not an elk hunt. It's not a sheep hunt. You don't have to buy, Kenetrex or Crispies for that. You can hotel it if you're not, a backpack camper yet. You're going to see a ton of animals and going to have a ton of fun, by the way, as well. Like very high chances of being successful. And you're going to learn a lot of skills. You're going to learn how to glass. You're going to learn how to be stock to a degree. You're going to learn about the wind. Then maybe a year or two later, you do a mule deer hunt, and you take that one step further and build a couple new skills. Now you're looking at topography, how to read maps, how to analyze terrain and figure out where should we be, like where are we probably going to find animals. And then maybe you do an archery elk hunt. You take it one step further. Now we're like really, hopefully learning how to pack weight, how to quarter big animals, how to do logistics that way. And then now it's like, okay, you've already learned 60% of the skills to go to Alaska and do that moose hunt. Now you're just focused on, flying to Alaska with a rifle and hiring a bush plane and picking a spot, instead of learning all of those on your dream hunt. Why don't you do a bunch of other fun experiences to learn that so you can really get more out of your dream hunt?
Yeah, and I think like just from the basic principle, the experiences are what I get. Like at the end of the day, it's the rocking chair test, right? Like you're an old man, you're sitting in your rocking chair. Like what are you gonna look back on? I promise you, it's all of the little adventures. It's it's not the fact that you killed a 350 bull or didn't kill a 350 bull. That may be up there, but dude, it's the antelope hunts, it's the caribou hunts, it's the mule deer hunt, with your buddy. Like those type of things are really important. And to your point, like I think it's skill stacking. Like honestly, when you said antelope hunt and like the Hall Road caribou hunt, I know that's a bucket list thing for a lot of people. It's no different. Like to me, I was like, this is just like hunting antelope in eastern Montana or something. So if you can do that, you can easily do, the other for sure. And it's just like, you kind of just get better at it and keep doing these things. And so, yeah, a huge believer of it. Huge fan of like kind of just going on different adventures.
How do you balance for your own self, and you can take this however you would do it. This doesn't have to be like, well, this is what I would do for everyone else. But for yourself, how do you balance between like the fan favorites, the hunt, like the experiences that you love so much versus the new experiences? Because, no matter who you are, everyone's got a limited resource. It could be time, it could be money, it could be energy, whatever it is. No one can do it all, and especially in the same year. And so for me, that's the archery elk hunt. I mean, that's the we got 8 guys every year. It's tradition. That's a hunt I hate missing out on. And I've done it twice now, and both for good reasons. One of my best friends was getting married. I was in the wedding. And at that same time, I got gifted
That's not a good
5.
Reason. No weddings in September. That's a rule around here.
I don't attend weddings in September, but I will be in someone's wedding in September. Like if we're that close and we're that good of friends, and to add to that, I had bought 1 point in Colorado and I went to buy my next point and I had 5. They switched their system over a few years ago. I just ended up with 4 extra points. And so I'm like, well, our group is too big anyway, because we can only hunt 5 people in Montana or 6 people in Wyoming as a group. And we had 7. So we can't apply as a group anyway. I have a wedding that, I really should go to. Like I wanted to go to it. And I wanted to be in my buddy's wedding. And I had these 5 points. I'm like, well, at the time, 5 points in Colorado was like kind of the threshold for like a second rifle hunt for like the next 7 years. Like there was no better places to put points for 7 more years to get a better experience on paper. So I'm like, I might as well burn these now.
Yeah.
And so I did that as a rifle hunt instead. So it all worked out. I shot a beautiful bull too. First solo elk hunt, alpine, way up high, like 12,000 feet. It was a crazy experience. Learned a lot of skills the hard way on that hunt just by being alone. And it all worked out, but I missed the archery hunt that year. My brother shot a beautiful 6x6 bull with his bow. The 2 biggest bulls my brother shot with a bow I missed out on. The first one I was in college. I don't really count that. I couldn't miss my senior year of college in the electrical engineering course. I just would have fell behind and probably not graduated, and then I would have hunted not as much the rest of my life. This year's the one I count as the second time, and it's because my wife is finally done with residency, and she can take time off, and she can start hunting the West, and she wanted to hunt the West with me. and didn't want to start with archery elk with the big group of people. She wanted something like, hey, let's start smaller, just you and I'm new to
Yeah.
it. And so we're doing the rifle antelope in Wyoming together for that reason. And so, it's a great reason. Like, a lot of people wish their, partners wanted to come hunting with them. Some people are like, nah, that's my time. But so I like it, but part of me is like, gosh, I kind of get a little FOMO missing out on the archery elk
Yeah.
hunt. With limited resources, you just can't do both. And so how do you handle that with all the experiences you've done? I'm sure there's some where you're like, I'd love to do this every year, but there's a bunch of other new things I want to do. How do you kind of work through that?
So, I mean, the problem is the more hunts you go on, the more times you're like, I really want to do that again. Like, we should go back next year. Like, I just got back from Kodiak hunting blacktail deer, and it was like, I can't wait to do that again. And so, like, there's all these hunts that you want to do. For me, I've kind of always had this rule, and I don't follow it to the T, but to me, there's three types of hunts that I try to book every year. One is with all my buddies, right? So I have like a group of buddies that we've been friends since like kindergarten, right? So this year we're all going on that moose hunt. And we don't go every year. I don't think we did a hunt together last year. And so like sometimes we miss a year, but like, the buddies hunt is like one of those, like the camaraderie, the stories. That's something that I'll always cherish. I always want like a big adventure. Usually that's a solo hunt. Sometimes if I'm going somewhere gnarly, I'll take a buddy. But like I need a big adventure, something new and exciting, right? Like that's that's that one. And then I gotta have my elk hunt, that's just I have to have my archery. And a lot of times that is solo. I enjoy hunting solo. So a lot of my hunts do end up being solo, but my archery elk season is kind of like, that's the one I have to have. So, I guard that one pretty religiously. And then I try to fill in too. Like, and now I'm like at the point, last year, my kid goes kind of with me. He'll go antelope hunting or something, or whitetail does, mix in the kids hunts and things like that. So, which is a lot more difficult than I ever thought it would be. Like, yeah, I'll take my kid hunting, but my hunting's at such a level that, it's hard to take a 4-year-old. So you kind of got to like go on a doe hunt or go, on an antelope hunt or something easy like that. So making sure I mix those in as we move forward. And again, like my wife she likes to go spring bear hunting. She likes to go glass and things like that. So you got to mix it in. But when it comes to like which big adventure hunts to choose, like I kind of just like, okay, which, what are my top two? And a lot of it is what tags can you get? Like, cause at the end of the day, everyone's like, how do you choose? You're just like, yeah, the lottery tends to choose for me. Like if I don't draw anything, I go to Alaska. Yeah. Like, so to some degree, like my tag strategy is very much, I kind of have a 5-year plan on the elk. I would love to have 2 great elk tags every year. That doesn't always happen. And then if I don't have a big adventure hunt, Alaska tends to be my adventure lately. So last few years, it's Alaska. It's not necessarily like, do you get to choose? Last year I ended up with 3 big bull tags kind of all over, and I didn't do any other hunting really, just those 3 tags. And so honestly, once you get into this, the tags kind of choose you less than you, or more than you choose where you want to go. But I do think that like I could stack my season. When people say they can't get hunts, I could stack my seasons way fuller than I have time for. So like to that extent, like when people say like, oh, you can't get tags anymore, I'm like, I had 3 bull tags last year. I could do that again this year if I wanted to. I didn't, obviously I'm trying to hold out for better ones, but it's very doable.
Yeah, the archery elk is the very common answer of like the sacred, like no one messes with the 3rd week of September or the 2nd, whatever that is for
the
you.
Whole month.
Some people say the whole month. Yeah, that's amazing. For me, that's way up there. But growing up in Minnesota, and I'm very fortunate to have family properties. My dad was an entrepreneur and he bought properties, sold properties, but we had a lot of good whitetail hunting land growing up ever since, I think I was 5 when they bought the last property. And so my whole life I grew up with phenomenal whitetail land, food plots. And in a way it is a little bit of golden handcuffs, like just like a good salary job where it's like, it's great and you don't have to do anything else, but also you're never elk hunting the entire month of September. So golden handcuffs. And it's like when I talk to him about going out of state to hunt whitetails, he looks at me like I grew a third arm. He's like, why would you go out of state to hunt whitetails? And now it's even worse because me and my wife just bought a 40-acre farmstead with whitetails here. She shot a doe in our backyard. She shot a buck, her first buck with a bow, first buck off the farm right behind our house. Like we wake up at 6:45 and we're in our stand at 6:50, right? And so he just looks at me like I'm crazy. It's like, I don't know. I want to hunt somewhere else. Like I want more. I want to do some more things. And so I think part of it is like it's hard to kind of break those molds if you're like the traditional, family deer camp to like say, no, you know what, I'm going to go to Nebraska and hunt whitetails, or I'm going to go do an elk hunt. It's the first one's always the hardest, but then after that, I feel like you really learn a lot about just how easy it is to follow through. Like you said, when you pull the trigger, when you book the hunt or set the dates or make the plan, it really isn't that hard to follow through from that point on. And that was a decision. You didn't have to do any work to say, I'm going to do it. And I'm sure Alaska is probably one of those examples as well, where you did it once and the first time was probably a lot of nerves. Like, is it going to work out? Are we going to get stuck in Fairbanks? Are we going to be able to, get the bush planes? Is he going to pick us up on time? Like, what if, this happens? What if our sat phone dies? What if, and now
all of those things happened on my first trip, by the way.
So now you're like, well, it all happened. So now I never have to be worried about it because we figured it all out. I really view Alaska as one of those skills to unlock, and I want to unlock it early because it just opens up so much opportunity if you don't have any reservations about getting to Alaska and hunting in Alaska. Think of all the things you can do.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to do up there. I would be curious, like from your perspective, because you said, you have the same hunt. You kind of mentioned Alaska, and I have the same problem. Is like for me, September is sacred, and so going on a moose hunt is actually very, very difficult. It's
because
like,
it's in September, right?
Yeah, like give up peak dates. Like I don't know if I could do it. And so like the last time I moose hunted was 2012. So I went in 2012. That was the first trip to Alaska. Everything went wrong. Like you said, the sat phone died. I got stuck in Anchorage. Everything went wrong. Didn't get picked up. So that, fast forward 12 years and, now I'm going back this year, but it's like so hard to give up September. And so for you, like, how do you ever give up your like local hunt, your, like the local time or
the family deer camp,
deer camp? Yeah. That stuff.
No, I've never given that up. Except for like sections football games. But like I got off the bus, drove to the farm and went hunting like straight from the football game. It was like a noon game. So I made it for like 30 minutes. But no, I typically don't. And I've gone on hunts. Like I've left deer camp to go on a hunt that was open and then I just hunted the end of it. But so far I have not had to adjust that hunt at all. It's easy because it's, it's going home to my parents, which is only 2 hours away and it's on a weekend. So I don't need any vacation. Sometimes I take a couple days and hunt the middle of the week. But so far I haven't. And one of the things that kind of helps that is that first week of November is actually a little bit of a quiet week across all other experiences, right? Like archery elk is wrapped up by then for sure. Rifle seasons can be going on, but typically rifle seasons are long enough where there really never is like hard conflicts of dates. And so we've done rifle hunts the week before. I've done rifle hunts the week after. I am not a purist with a stick and a string, man. I would prefer to use rifles. I just also like to hear elk bugling. And one time the opportunity came up where I got to hunt elk with a rifle in September in a very, very high-end unit. And it was amazing. I'm like, this is elk hunting, man. Like to have bulls bugling everywhere, giants, it's broken like Badlands country. So if I see it, he's in trouble type of hunting, and having that 300 Win Mag instead of a bow, it's like things go wrong all the time. But there's a lot of confidence when you're looking down that optic with this bull broadside of what's going to happen. And I loved that confidence of like, this is going to work. Like he doesn't have to step out into an opening. He doesn't have to come into 40 from 60. And so I loved it. I'm not a bow purist by any means. I just do it because they bugle in September.
Yeah, it's funny because I was a kind of a bow snob for a lot of years, kind of a bow purist. I don't know, probably through my late teens, into my 20s, probably midway through my 20s, and then ended up going on a late season rifle elk hunt with my buddies. And I was kind of like, I mean, my dad was a rifle elk hunter. I shot my first elk with a rifle, and it was just like, oh yeah, rifle's cute, but like, to me, even growing up, rifle camp was like the good old boys. They drank a lot of whiskey at camp and kind of hunted. Like it wasn't necessarily like what I considered hardcore. And so I got in with some buddies, and they, we horsepacked. I kind of want to go just to horseback, right? And so we horsepacked in, and I learned the other side of like rifle hunting. Like you can take it as hardcore or as serious as you want. And I fell in love with like the late season hunting, and it's just such a grind, trying to grind out those bulls. And it flipped. Now, like I very much love late season rifle hunts as much as I do early season archery hunts. They're totally different sports, different games. Like they're just different, very different, but they're both amazing. And finding elk late season has, become, I don't know, a passion of mine. So now it's like I have to almost battle like, okay, I got all these points. Do I use them in these states and get good archery tags, or like burn them on these rifle hunts late season? And then last few years, I've pretty much, I archery hunt Montana, and I try to just draw a rifle tag anywhere else, which is not as easy.
And it does seem like that does seem like a good fit for like experience and success, right? So like maybe in your experience, ours is like the rut lately in like the last 3-4 years has been different and it's been changing. It's kind of hard to like pin it on something, right? We're in Montana, it's like, maybe it's wolves. But then you go to Colorado and they do the same thing. They're not very vocal. Third week of September, nothing's really going on. It's like, well, there's no wolves here yet. I mean, I know they just released them, but by and large, like the wolves aren't keeping the elk quiet. And so I think it's like to have those magical days in September, like you really have to have either get incredibly lucky or have a good pulse on the local herd. And that is, I mean, you can really do that when you're local, when you live there, and you can be like, hey, they're firing up, like tomorrow's the day. Versus us, we have to pick our dates and our vacation, a year out a lot of times. And so we're locked in. And that's why we just kind of go with that third week. And if that's not the week they're lighting up, it can be a really hard hunt. And then flip side, when you go out of state with a rifle, like you don't have to maybe dial it in. I mean, that last 400 yards is a big 400 yards. Right. If you don't have to close that gap, I mean, that's a big pro in the pros and cons column that helps, when you're not there, when you're in a new unit or when you're traveling or when you have to lock in a date. Like elk kind of do the same thing every November, that November and December, they're doing the same thing. You don't really have to dial it into the day like those magical September days you kind of have to do.
Yeah, but I see the part I like about rifle hunting, to me, it's, once you find them, it's its own thing. But to me, it's like finding that big old bull that's just held up in some tiny little nook that no one can see from anywhere. And there's not another friggin' elk within 5 miles of him. And you're like, that's like found you. To me, it's like a game of hide and seek.
You get to pick what you go after in a way versus archery hunting. It's almost like fishing. You have no idea what's going to bite. Yeah, and then that's when the game is on and the heart's pumping, your bobber's down, and you're like, what's it going to be, right? He's coming in. What's it going to be? The rifle hunting is like the opposite. It's like, that's the one I want. The challenge is finding the one you want. And then, part 2 of the challenge is getting close to them. But once you find the one you want, then, like you said, the game flips and now you're playing a new game. And so it's funny that I heard, your group of guys, it sounded like, is very open to new experiences for the guys hunt, right? Is that what you meant with like we've bounced around and done different things with that group of people, and that's about hunting with those people, not necessarily those people and that hunt. Whereas our group is the people, but it's also archery elk hunting.
The same place, right?
And there's been times where it's like, do we go to Colorado over the counter or do we just do a different hunt? And it always comes back, no matter how bad the unit is that we're stuck with, archery elk hunting. And I'm like, we could do some pretty cool mule deer hunts or rifle hunts or other things. And so that's part of the reason where it's hard to get all the other new experiences in, because our group is they just love that archery elk so much that they don't prioritize the other experiences.
Yeah, which can be tough. I know like some people like that's always the classic issue with like buddies, right? Like it's like everyone has their own opinion on what you want to do and what kind of hunt it should be
Yeah.
or how to do it. Yeah, we very much have that in our own group. I think there's like a group text still going on right now about this hunt we're going to do. It's like, hey, here's the rules, god dang it, and like we'll see if that even happens. So I don't know how have you managed the social dynamics of hunting with the same group year over year? Does it stay pretty
It gets tough. And so I would say my brother started the group. My brother was the OG Western hunter. Him and my dad had gone on elk hunts back in like the 90s and early 2000s, and they were all guided rifle hunts. But, my brother was the one researching and finding outfitters. And, picture the night, like, we weren't around to really, maybe, no, you weren't planning hunts then either.
no?
It's like there wasn't even forums, right, to really like get good information. They were out there, but that now it's so easy. But then it's like, I don't know, I saw in Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation magazine and this guy's outfitting thing, and he had good pictures. I called him, I don't know, and so they had some mixed experiences for sure. But he kind of knew, he had some of those skills. He knew how to get to the west. He knew how to navigate. He'd done it before. He chased elk, and so then he met a couple people around when he built a new house. He moved back to our hometown, built a house on the lake, and some of his neighbors just happened to be hunters that they got along with. And they started talking about how they'd all love to do this archery elk thing. And my brother's like, I think we could do it, like DIY. Like, I've been to the West. Like, I don't think we need to hire an outfitter. I don't think we need to spend $5,000. And so they did it a year. And that first year was my last year in college. He's quite a bit older than me. And so I missed out on the first one, and they got lucky. My brother shot a nice 6x6 bull last night with his bow. And so then that was like, man, this is awesome. They all said like, this was awesome. One guy dropped off. He was kind of not as dedicated as the rest, didn't work out as much, got huge blisters. I kind of only hunted half the week. He was there for the guys, right? And he still is that kind of person. He's like, he's there for the guys. He doesn't really care for the elk as much. But the core group has stayed together. Well, then I swapped out for him. And so for a few years, it was that same four of us. But then, it's like, hey, my brother really wants to come. And so then another brother gets added. And then, hey, my college roommate, like, he's almost like a brother to me. So then you get one more in and another and another. And then so now we're up to like 7 or 8 people, which is really hard because a lot of states have party app limits of like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So we have to split groups and make sure both groups are guaranteed to draw. And sometimes they aren't. So like, this year I'm not in the group, but the group had to split. Half of them drew the Montana General. The other half drew the Montana General and a limited entry tag in the breaks. It's like, well, they're going to go to the breaks. So now, the two groups are diverging for a year. So that's been tricky. It's like, where do you draw the line? Because everyone would go on it. If you invited people, like, hey, you want to come elk hunting with us? They're like, sure. When you got an established group and you've done it before and they know we've been killing bulls, we're probably at that 15-20% success rate. People easy to join that group. And so it's hard to manage, like, kind of gatekeep in a way. You don't want to offend anyone, but you just can't there's not a lot of spots out there where 20 people can camp and archery elk hunt in the same spot. And it's like our max was 10 one year. And it's like, this spot's not big enough. Like, you break off into 2 people, it's like, that's 5 different spots.
No.
And so for a 9-day hunt, you're talking about 45 different hunt plans if you're never going to double up. And you don't ever double up unless there's something worth doubling up on, right? And so it's just like, that's too much. So that's been hard. That's been very hard.
We kind of had that. Like we had this rifle hunt that we used to do every single year. One of my good buddies, his dad did it for 20 years, then he took over. And that's that first hunt I went on. And we got to this point where, everyone wanted to go with us because, they're horseback and we're killing every single year. And so then we had to like set a rule, right? And so the rule became, what was it? So the rule was you could bring someone if they had enough points to get someone in the party a tag too. So instead of anyone coming, because like people, this was a tag, let's just say it took 5 points. So if, none of us, and we had it so like every year someone else would draw. And so it kind of just got mixed up. We didn't all hunt. So it's like, we all go, but whoever has a tag. And so then the rule was like, if you're going to bring someone, basically they got to have 10 points. And so like, if I want to bring my buddy Joe and Joe's got 10 points, Joe can get me and him. So that was kind of the rule. And that went on for a little while. And then eventually we kind of even just got rid of that. And basically went back to just the core group, and it was like, yeah, we got to say no, because like you just get, it just gets too big and it's not worth it, and it creates stress within the group. Honestly, anymore 4 is a lot to me. Like I don't think I would be doing groups bigger than 3. And then again, everyone's got their own like mission, right? Everyone's like, I just want to go on this big group hunt, which is great. Like that's what you want to do. But to me, like you want to go kill elk. 3 guys is a lot to me.
We view it maybe a little bit different. First of all, you're local, so that definitely changes dynamics.
Well, this is, this is
traveling
like not
across country to new spots. Oh, okay. We like to hunt in groups of 2. So rarely are we rocking around with 3 or 4 people. And what I like about hunting new spots with like 4 or 6 is you do get to cast. There's a fine line between casting a wide net and learning units faster versus like hunt out all your options, right? Yeah. And so like 8 is like, yeah, we don't need to cast that wide of a net. I like 4 because you can break up 2 groups of 2, check out 2 different areas, come back, be like, yeah, well, that place was loaded with elk. Now maybe all 4 of us will go into that area together and then break up from there. And, hey, you hunt this face of the ridge, we're going to hunt that face of the ridge, meet up at the bottom. Or type, hey, I'm going to drop the truck up high, you guys drop your 4-wheeler down low, and we'll do kind of like a flip-flop, make sure you leave the keys or type of thing. I like that aspect of 4 people. We do not like hunting 4. But there's been times where we've gotten arrows and elk because we were walking in together, heard a bull, split up, and now you're covering 120 yards with a caller. And there's a lot to be said for like, that too. It's so dependent though on a lot of features. Like 4 killers can be really good. 1 killer and, 1, I wouldn't say non-ventured, but non-rookie, and 2 rookies. It's like, that's kind of a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's got to be carrying your weight.
That's a big part of who do you add. And then another part of it that I think is easy to overlook, especially in the spring when you're like getting excited, like, oh, what should we do? And who wants to go? Like, this is also in a way like your vacation. Like, this is archery elk hunting to me is like other people's like week in Hawaii, right?
Right.
And you're not just bringing anyone to go on a beach in Hawaii with you, right? Like there's people you're like, I am not bringing them. Like nope, I'm not spending a week with that person. And the same can happen maybe even to a higher degree when there's emotion involved and you're tired and you're sweating and you're trying to grind and people are just, rubbing together like brakes on a semi-trailer, and there's a lot of heat and a lot of tension. Like things can boil over fast, and we've heard horror stories. And so it's that part of it too. It's like, are they going to be able to carry their weight? Like I've had people on this podcast that did it and they picked a guy, they go in, shoot a bull way back in. And the guy's like, I don't pack out elk. Like my backpack can't carry elk. And yeah, like bulls on the ground. It's like, dude, you're telling me this now?
Way.
Like we're 3 miles in. So he's like, yeah. And he's like, well, I like that dude. We're still friends, but I don't hunt with him anymore. And so it's like, you got to be really careful about those types of things too. Who do you include on your vacations?
I say that, but one of the guys in our group, and I'll just pick on him because it's fun. But like we always joke that we have to drag him to every single elk. Like we took this trip in Idaho and like threw a dart at a map, rode horses in and found elk. And I our one buddy was taking the day off, and I come back to camp and I had found this bull, and the bull was like 3 miles from camp. And I was like, dude, there's a bull right up here. And I was like, it's right by the trail. It's right next to it. He's like, really? So we start hiking and we make it a half mile. I was like, dude, I thought you said it was right here. I was like, I think it's right around the corner. I can just had to drag his ass all the way to the elk. Because when I told him it was 3 miles away, he wouldn't have gone and shot it. But yeah, like, you got to have that one group or one friend of the group that's always that guy. But, that takes a lifetime of like dealing with those people. We always have that friend that we've had forever that's, everyone else hates. We're like, it's just Joe. Like that's how he is. And like,
and if your group doesn't have one,
maybe you're Joe.
Yeah, maybe you're Joe. We've got the one buddy that is a great time, but he just isn't as dedicated. He's not going to work out. He's not going to be able to hunt every day. But that same guy, he got quarter-size blisters on both of his heels, last day just didn't hunt. The other 3 went in, killed a bull at 5:30 at night on the last night. 2 guys said, hey, they did their pictures. They sent one guy back with as much gear as he could carry to swap out pack frames. Sure enough, he put his boots on, hiked all the way in, blisters on both feet, and he's strong as an ox, so he carried a ton of weight. And he saddled up when he didn't want to. And, one of these other guys is like, dude, I just cannot be packing out rear quarters anymore. Like, my back is messed up after they had one really bad haul out. And I think it was the same one, actually. They got back to camp at like 3 a.m. It was like 3 miles in. And so he's like, I'll carry front quarter. And this guy's a grinder. Like, he sets up camp. He's a hard worker. He's just like, I can't carry that much weight anymore. It's like, all right, that's fine. Like, I can. It doesn't matter to me. But the people that like don't tell you that they're not going to help until the help is needed, that's a different one. Like, that person doesn't get invited again.
Yeah.
That one's tough. That one is tough. But yeah, no, there's a lot of things to do. And I was curious to ask you, I spend a lot of time talking about hunting. I spend a lot of time thinking about hunting. But there's a lot of fishing things on my list too. And that, like, throw another wrench into the problem of like, oh, I'd love to do some deep sea fishing. Or I'd love to go to Alaska and do some like shrimp pots and crab pots and do the Alaska fishing thing. And that, even like small things that a lot of people probably wouldn't think about. Like, I want to go down south and catch big sunfish and bluegills. Or like, I want to go, spend a weekend trying to catch some muskies. And it's like, do you get that same bug, the same itch?
It's funny you bring that up. So I did a ton of fishing growing up. Most people don't know that. Like, I was super fortunate. We had multiple bass ponds. They had trout in the creek. So I'd catch bass, one day and trout the next day. And my dad was diehard steelhead fisherman. So we caught a ton of steelhead, did a ton of fishing. By the time I was like 18 and got into elk hunting, it was kind of elk hunting from 18 to, let's just say 38, 37, something there. Was hunting. That's all I did. And my kid, of all people, like, we'd been fishing, and I think he'd caught a few fish, but like, I think I owned like one fishing pole and some whatever. So this past May, we went on this big month-long trip around the country. My wife had a sabbatical, and so we were like, I was going to do some work on the trip, but we're going to go a bunch of dinosaur parks and all this stuff. And dude picked up fishing, and he picked up a fishing addiction. Like, he straight up, like, from day one, I think we stopped to go fishing somewhere and then ended up having to buy like, all the gear. And he wants to go to every fishing shop. Dude, he's looking at mounted fish. Like, he knows all the fish. He's like 4. So on this trip, he goes and catches, I don't know what other 4-year-old has caught fish in 8 states, but he was just obsessed. Right. And so,
wow.
Yeah, and it's so like naturally, I was like trying to get back into it. It was funny because like I'll admit this and make fun of myself. Like, I've caught a lot of trout in my life, but I was like, okay, I've been out of the game a while. Like, I had to look on YouTube, like, what's the best ways to catch trout, like lake trout? Like, I remember fishing power bait as a kid. I remember fishing worms. Like, I know how to do it, but like, I operate at one of the highest levels of elk hunting. Like, I'm not going to be like a half-ass fisherman. So like, I'm deep diving into YouTube videos and like trying to figure it out. Like, where do we catch big trout? Like, what are the features? Like, I'm going in the rabbit hole with him, I guess. And it didn't let up. Like, I thought like it was a phase, and it's like, no, now he's he saw a picture of a pike, and he's like, I want to catch a pike. And he's like, so now we're watching. Dude, the kid's watching videos of pike fishing on YouTube. He's like, Dad, we got to get tip ups. And I'm like, Jesus, like, we're going deep in the rabbit hole here. And then one of my old employees, he's like big into fishing, and so I'm texting him like, Matthew, how do I catch a pike in Montana? And he's like, oh, I got you. And so he was over the other day, and my 4-year-old and Matthew are going through like gear and stuff, like getting ready for this pike trip. And I was like, I guess we're I'm fishing now. And like, this is like what we do, but it's those things. Like, I kind of want to just embrace it, going back to like doing whatever the kids want to do, and kind of, going on these cool adventures. I'm all about it. It's like, hey, we're going to figure out how to go catch a pike in Montana. Like, that's cool. I'm all for encouraging that, because that's the gateway drug to, cool, how do I go kill whatever sheep in Mexico? Or how do I, go international? Like, to me, that's like, the gateway drug of like, oh, you want to catch a pike? Let's figure it out, dude. And like, push on, try to figure out how to catch a pike and all that stuff. So no, it's been fun. So yeah, definitely getting back into fishing just recently.
That's awesome. I kind of wonder if that is pretty common where like you teach your kid a love for the outdoors, but they also are like, well, dad does elk hunting, so clearly that's not cool. I want to do something else. And so then, you know what I mean? Because
Maybe.
my brother's kids are kind of the same way. They're 16 now, twin boys, and we have been a big pheasant hunting family, a big traditional deer camp firearm season family, and then we got into the Western stuff, and they will do anything, but they got addicted to waterfall like your kid is addicted to fishing. And it's like we've dabbled in waterfall hunting, like we've shot a couple ducks, but like we aren't big waterfall family, and they are like addicted to it. Like they have said if they are not constantly seeing deer, which is that's our big family thing, they will be like, I'm not coming deer hunting tomorrow, I'm gonna go hit this feed with my buddies, we're gonna do we're gonna do mallards instead. I'm like, it's deer hunting. This is deer hunting weekend. Like this is like gospel.
This is what we
You
do.
have to, this is what we do. This is us. And so I think it's maybe like, well, that's dad's thing. Like I want my own thing. I want to be smarter than my dad at something.
I hope not. Like I would be slightly offended if my kid becomes a fly fisherman over an elk hunter. But you know, that'll probably be not luck. My dad was a big elk hunter.
I bet
he'll do.
I bet they'll do it.
We'll
They'll still do it because it is fun. They might just have a collapsible fly rod in their pack for lunchtime.
My approach has always been like just not push it. My dad used to go hunting a lot, and he would take me, and there was times I got to go, but I remember far more the times I didn't get to go, and being like, I'm so mad I wanted to go.
I used to hate
that.
I used to have to sit at the bus stop waiting for the bus as my dad and my brother are actively packing up the truck in the driveway and pulling out, and you're just sitting there steaming.
Yeah,
I could have kept up. You know, I got 3-inch legs. I could have made it.
No, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a big driver for me is, keeping them, engaged, doing fun stuff, but like not pushing it. Yeah. If he wants to do something, great. If he doesn't want to do something, fine. So.
Awesome. No, that's a cool story. And I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your life and kind of how you plan out all these adventures, because it's been on my mind as well. And I think it was a great conversation. I think we could probably go on for a week talking about all kinds of stuff like this, because it's all the big stuff that really matters. You know, not whether you shoot fixed blades or expandables, but like, some of these things that it's like, man, how do you do like what you want to do? How do you build that life? Yeah. And so I think that's a pretty cool topic. We'll have to get you on the entrepreneurship podcast to kind of hit the other side of that, like life mapping, like life strategy. How do you if that's your goal, how do you use the next 20 years to get there? Because it's a lot's possible. Even if you give it that much time.
Yeah, even the entrepreneur side, like I'm really big on like how do you build your business around those things, right? Like how do you? And to me, the greatest litmus test is like, can I leave for September and not have too much go wrong? Like, that's always been like, how do you build a business that allows you to leave to be able to go hunting? Now I'm at a point where I'm hunting September, October, November, and it's like, how do I build my businesses so that I can do that? We should have that conversation too.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being here, Cody. Once again, thank you. We'll have to do another one in the future, but I do want to respect your time. We're coming up here on an hour, and then unashamedly, I do have to drop to hop on a Nebraska whitetail team hunt planning session as well. So got to pull the ripcord on this one, and we will pick this up in another podcast sometime.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Thank you for listening, folks.